Boy's name was Kale, just 16 summers old with dirt on his skin, scars on his knees, and eyes too old for his youth. He lived in a war-ravaged village, tucked at the edge of the Eastern Divide, a place no longer marked on maps and long forgotten by merchants. The great kingdoms of Eris and Velmar had waged war across its soil for generations, and now only ash remained. Kale hadn't picked up a sword yet. His father had died in the siege of Tolmarch when Kale was only 5. His elder brother bled out on the northern plains, clutching his banner with trembling hands. His mother, she vanished the night Velmar's fire-wielding cavalry razed the eastern fields. All Kale had left was a battered goatskin water flask and a worn pendant of old Aaron stone his mother had placed around his neck, whispering, "You are still light, my boy, even in their darkness." The air was heavy that dusk, the kind of silence where birds don't sing and trees don't sway. Just smoke, just ghosts. Kale was searching the outer fields for survivors. People, animals, anything still breathing. The once green valley was blackened. Trees were limbless silhouettes. The grass had long surrendered to fire. All he heard was the crunch of ash beneath his boots and the whisper of wind through burned ruins. Then came the cough. Faint, broken, human. Kale froze. One hand instinctively clutched the hilt of the wooden dagger he carried. The other gripped the flask. The cough came again, closer this time from beyond the ridge near the shattered stone arch that once led to the village square. Slowly, Kale stepped forward. His feet made no sound, trained like a rabbit that had escaped one too many predators. As he crested the ridge, he saw him. A man, slumped beneath the stone arch, blood oozing from a wound on his side. His armor, though blackened and dented, still bore the unmistakable sigil of Velmar, a crimson falcon across a silver shield. His helmet lay beside him, revealing dark hair soaked in sweat and dirt, a jaw clenched with pain, and lips cracked dry as broken earth. Enemy. Kale's breath caught. This was the face of the men who burned his home, slaughtered his people, and shattered his family. He should run, or better, finish him off. That's what survivors did in these lands. But Kale didn't move. His eyes fixed on the man's chest, barely rising. His fingers trembled on the flask. The soldier looked up. His eyes were green, sharp, even through the haze of pain. He opened his mouth, tried to speak, but only dust escaped his throat. Kale stepped back instinctively, but then he looked at the flask. His mother's voice echoed faintly in his mind, even in their darkness. Without thinking, Kale knelt. He pressed the flask gently to the soldier's lips. The man's eyes widened in disbelief, then closed as he drank. The water trickled down the side of his jaw, and he choked briefly, as if surprised by mercy. Kale said nothing. He didn't want gratitude. He didn't even know why he was doing it. "Why?" the man rasped, finally. Kale stood up, eyes hard. "You look thirsty." The man gave a broken laugh and coughed again. "You're not Velmari." "I'm not," Kale said. "Then you should have let me die." Kale didn't answer. He turned to walk away, but the soldier spoke again. "My name is Kaler." Kale stopped. "Tell your people, Kaler is dead. Let that be enough." The boy turned back. "Why? What are you hiding?" Kaler's eyes sharpened, even bleeding, even dying. There was something regal, something burdened about his gaze. He reached inside his armor with trembling fingers and pulled out a small gold-inlaid sigil. Kale's breath caught in his throat. A double-marked falcon crest, crowned. Royal blood. This man wasn't just a soldier. He was King Kaler Velmari, the ruthless warlord who burned cities and broke alliances. The shadow Kale had feared his entire childhood. And he had just given him water. Kale stepped back, stunned. You're the king." Kaler nodded faintly. "For now." Kale's thoughts spiraled. His mother, his brother, his village, all lost to this man's army. This was the monster they feared. This was the man the bards cursed in their songs. And Kale had spared him. He clenched his fists, unsure whether to weep or rage. Kaler's voice came softer now. "You can kill me, boy. I deserve it. But know this. Your mercy has already broken me more than any sword." Kale didn't speak. His heart thundered with 100 emotions at war. He looked down at the flask, then back at the king. I didn't give you water because you deserved it, he said coldly. I gave you water because I didn't want to become like you. And with that, Kale turned, leaving the king in the dust and silence of his crumbled empire. But fate, as it always does, was not finished. The boy thought that would be the end of it. Kale never expected to see the dying king again. He returned to his shattered village with silence in his throat and smoke in his hair. He didn't speak of what he'd done. Who would believe him anyway? A village orphan, feeding water to the monster who brought fire to their world. He kept the memory buried, like the bones of so many who now slept under scorched soil. But the winds of war are like old ghosts. They always circle back. 3 weeks passed. Kale hunted rats for meat, dug roots from ruined farmland, and lived in the hollow remains of the mill house. The skies remained gray, the earth dull. But rumors began to spread. Quiet at first, then louder. The war is ending. Velmar's king is missing. A truce has been whispered near the Blackstone River. Kale paid no mind. Kingdoms rose and fell while boys like him still fought for a loaf of bread. But one day, as he tended a small fire outside the ruins, a shadow fell across his path. A tall man, armored in deep bronze, with a scar running from jaw to throat, stood silently. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were alert. Too alert for a mere scout. Behind him, 4 more riders stood in formation, cloaks fluttering in the breeze. "Are you Kale of the Divide?" the man asked. Kale frowned. He didn't answer. The man reached inside his cloak and withdrew something wrapped in cloth. He opened it carefully. It was a golden sigil, the same crowned falcon Kale had seen days ago. Polished now, blood wiped clean. Kale's stomach twisted. The man bowed his head. "King Kalor sent for you." Kale's voice shook. "He's alive? Because of you. I didn't save him for this. You didn't save him to be thanked," the man said calmly. "That's why he chose you." They brought him across the hills, beyond the broken front lines, through territories that once would have killed a boy like him on sight. Now the flags of Eris and Velmar both hung limp in the wind, not side by side, but no longer raised in defiance either. At the edge of the Blackstone, in a newly erected war camp guarded by both banners, stood a pavilion made of scarlet silk and cold steel. There, in a massive chair, not a throne, but still unmistakably a seat of power, sat King Kalor. Alive. Wrapped in deep robes, one side of his body still bandaged, but alive. His eyes sharpened when Kale entered, but there was something different about them. Not cruel, not victorious. Human. The king raised his hand. The guards left. Only the boy and the king remained. "You came," Kalor said. "I didn't have a choice." The king smiled. "Neither did I, when I killed your people, when I burned your homes. I've carried every order like a blade in my chest, until the day you gave me water." Kale's fists clenched. "Why am I here?" Kalor stood slowly. "I want peace." Kale stared at him. Kalor walked to the table behind him, covered in old maps, crumpled letters, and symbols drawn in red chalk. "I've seen what I've built," he said. "Kingdoms stained with blood, victory hollowed by grief, and yet it was a boy, a peasant, who showed me more courage than my entire army." Kale remained still. "I offered you nothing, not mercy, not kindness, not even the promise of survival. But you gave me water, you gave me dignity." "I gave you pity," Kale said. "Don't confuse it with forgiveness." Kalor nodded. "Then let my next act be worthy of forgiveness." He handed Kale a scroll. Kale opened it. His hands trembled. It was a decree, signed by Kalor. A treaty between Velmar and Eris. The end of a war that had spanned 2 generations. The terms were strict. Reparations, return of prisoners, divided borders, but fair and real. "Why give this to me?" Kale asked. "Because they won't believe I've changed," the king said. "But if you speak of me, if you tell them what I was and what I became, they just might listen." Kale looked up, anger and disbelief burning in his eyes. "I'm no herald, no diplomat. I'm just a boy from a ruined village." Kalor smiled. "And I was just a soldier who became a monster. Yet here we are." Kale stared at the scroll again. Then slowly, carefully, he nodded. That night, Kale left the war camp under the cover of stars. No fanfare, no farewell, just a scroll tucked under his arm and the weight of history in his steps. But the world would change. And it began not with armies, not with crowns, but with a boy and a flask of water.
Cale returned to the divide under a blood-colored sky, the valley silent like a breath held too long. No armies marched. No horns blew. But something had changed in the air, a stillness that didn't come from defeat, but from exhaustion. Villagers peeked from broken homes as he passed, whispering his name like a ghost returned. In his hands, he carried the scroll that could end a war, yet every step forward felt heavier than the last. No one greeted him as a hero. There were no banners. No feasts. Only questions in hollow stares. He made his way to the council tent, where elders of both Aaron and surviving clans had gathered. They didn't recognize him at first, just a dusty boy, face shadowed by weeks of travel, holding a rolled parchment like it weighed more than steel. But when he spoke, they listened. When he unrolled the treaty, silence fell. And when he told them who had given it to him, the silence turned to fury. An elder slammed his staff to the ground. The boy is lying. King Cale is dead, another barked. He cannot make peace from the grave. He lives, Cale replied. His voice calm, but firm. He is alive, because I gave him water. Some shouted betrayal. Others demanded proof. A few called him cursed, as if kindness itself had become blasphemy. Cale stood through it all. I do not ask you to forgive him, he said. I only ask you to end the dying. A silence followed, deep and trembling. It was then that an old woman stepped forward. Her face lined like a map of grief, her hands knotted with years. She touched Cale's shoulder and whispered. My son never came home from the fields. My husband never came back from the ridge. If this scroll means no more mothers will wait for the dead, then let it be read. Cale handed her the parchment. She read it aloud, voice shaking, the words echoing through the valley like a prayer. By dawn, the council had agreed, a ceasefire would be honored. Messengers would ride. Flags would lower. Soldiers would return, or at least, those who still could. But peace is never without its price. 2 days later, in a distant hilltop stronghold known as the Cliff of Vows, both sides gathered for the signing. Eris in blue and gold. Velmer in crimson and silver. Soldiers watched one another with tired eyes, hands never far from hilts, hearts too scarred for trust. Cale stood between them, scroll in hand. From the Velmari side, King Cale emerged, not in armor, but in simple robes, bandages peeking from his sleeve, a walking cane in his hand. He looked weaker, but freer. A man who had bled to stay alive only so he could stop others from bleeding. From the Aaron side came Lord Varen, Cale's uncle by blood, though they had never met. A war general turned grey from loss, known for never retreating, and never forgiving. The two men faced each other as if across a grave. Cale stepped forward. His voice clear. This parchment bears the will of 2 broken kingdoms. One that burned. One that bled. And a boy, who did not let either become stone. Lord Varen glared. He burned your home. And I gave him water, Cale said. Because I wanted my children to grow up without ash on their faces. The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It rang like thunder beneath ribs. Cale stepped forward and pulled a dagger from his belt, not to fight, but to cut open his own palm. He let the blood drip onto the scroll. Let it be said, he murmured, that peace cost me more than war ever did. Varen looked at Cale, then Cale. He hesitated, then pulled a dagger of his own. He too bled onto the parchment. The war ended in silence. No cheers. No celebration. Just exhausted men exhaling, and ghosts finally weeping. Later that night, Cale sat alone by a quiet stream near the hilltop. His flask, now cracked from travel, rested beside him. Cale approached, slowly, leaning on his cane. "They will forget this day," the king said. "They always do," Kale replied. Kaler nodded. "But they will remember you." "I don't want them to." "You don't have to," Kaler said. "But stories, they live whether we ask them to or not." He placed a small, folded cloth beside Kale. Inside it, a medallion. Ancient. Royal. The mark of a king's champion. Kale looked up, shocked. "I'm no knight," he said. "You're something rarer," Kaler replied. "You're merciful." Kale stared into the stream, the water reflecting a face far older than his years. Perhaps peace didn't come with trumpets or banners. Perhaps it came with a flask, a boy, and a dying man who finally chose to live differently.
The war was over. But peace? Peace was a far more complicated thing. Even as banners were lowered and swords sheathed, the valley echoed with memories that could not be buried. The ruins still smoked in some corners. Charred stone and burnt iron littered the paths where children once played. No treaty could erase the shadows. Kale returned to his village, now half rebuilt and half haunted. People looked at him differently, some with awe, others with fear, a few with resentment. He was no longer just a farmer's boy. He was the one who spared the king. The one who ended the war. And somehow, that made him both hero and traitor. "Peacekeeper," they whispered behind his back. But no one dared say it to his face. He rebuilt his home one stone at a time, his mother's old shawl folded near the hearth, untouched. He planted new seeds in the ash-covered soil. And when the rains came, he watched them fall like apologies from the sky. Still, Kale couldn't sleep. Every night, he saw King Kaler's face, not as a tyrant, but as a man barely alive, whispering "water" with cracked lips. He remembered the blood on the scroll, the look in Lord Varen's eyes, the cold wind on the cliff of vows. And then, the message came. It arrived in the form of a soldier, not Aaron, not Velmari, but bearing a new insignia, 2 hands, palms open, across a black sun. The emblem of the new accord, the fragile coalition formed after the ceasefire. He brought a letter. Not sealed with wax, but tied with a white ribbon, a symbol of trust. Kale opened it under candlelight. To the boy who chose mercy. "I write not as a king, but as a man who owes you more than life. There is unrest in the northern borders. Raiders who thrive on chaos now seek to destroy what little peace we've sown. I ask not as a ruler, but as someone who once bled in your arms. Will you stand beside me once more?" Kaler *. Kale stared at the parchment for a long time. The candle flickered. The wind outside howled like an old wolf, and he could feel the weight of the valley pressing against the walls. He thought of refusing. He'd already given enough. But deep inside, something whispered, "If you don't go, someone else will. And they might not choose mercy." The journey to the northern frontier was harsher than his first. The roads were broken. Watchtowers abandoned. Smoke curled in the distance, not from homes, but from burning flags. These were not ordinary raiders. They were war scavengers, remnants of splintered factions, soldiers without a cause, mercenaries fed by hatred. They called themselves the Iron Howl and believed peace made men weak. Their leader? A former Aaron general, Cadran the Wolf, once a student of Lord Varen himself. Kale reached the stronghold where Kaler now resided, not in a palace, but in a stone monastery turned war room. There, Kaler waited, thinner, slower, but sharper than ever. He greeted Kale like a brother, embracing him not with royalty, but with quiet gratitude. "I never thought you'd come," the king said. "I shouldn't have," Kale replied. "But here I am." Kaler smiled. "That's what mercy does. It makes fools out of men, and yet, it saves kingdoms." That night, under a war map lit by torchlight, Kale listened as scouts described the Iron Howl's advance. Villages razed. Supply routes attacked. Ambassadors kidnapped. They weren't fighting for land. They were fighting against peace itself. Kaler sighed. Cadran believes that only fire can keep order. He thinks you shamed the old warriors by sparing me. He's not entirely wrong, Kale admitted. I did choose something they never taught us to value. What's that? The king asked. Kale looked at the flames licking the edge of the map. Hope. The next morning, Kale rode with a small band of scouts to the front lines. What he saw chilled him. Villages burned to their foundations, fields salted, bodies strung on trees with signs carved into their skin. One read, "Mercy is weakness." Another, "Kings die. Wolves survive." As they returned to the stronghold, an ambush struck. Arrows whistled from the cliffs. Men screamed. Horses fell. Kale ducked behind a stone slab, his heart pounding, the past roaring back, the siege, the fire, the dying king. But this time, he was not the boy with the flask. This time, he drew steel. The scouts fought back valiantly. Kale moved like someone possessed, not graceful, but efficient. He disarmed one attacker with a broken spear, knocked another unconscious with the hilt of his blade. But just as he thought they were clear, a war horn blew. From the trees emerged a tall figure clad in rusted armor, wolf pelts on his shoulders, eyes like burning coals. Cadran the wolf. "You're the boy who gave water to a dying king," he said, voice like gravel soaked in venom. Kale didn't answer. Cadran stepped closer. "I should thank you. Your mercy ended the war. But it also fractured the spirit of warriors. We became caretakers, not conquerors." Kale raised his sword. "And what are you now?" "A wolf without a pack." Cadran growled. "I am the flame that purges the sickness of softness." They clashed. Not like two trained duelists, but like two beliefs colliding. Steel rang against steel. Blood mixed with dust. Kale was faster, younger, but Cadran was brutal, every blow like a hammer falling. In a final desperate move, Kale ducked a swing and drove his sword into Cadran's thigh. The wolf howled and fell. Kale didn't kill him. Instead, he stood over him and whispered, "This time. I choose mercy again." Then he knocked him unconscious. When Kale returned to the stronghold, bruised and bloodied, carrying the fallen warlord's emblem, the silence was deafening. Kaler stood from his seat and walked toward him, ignoring the stares of nobles and guards. "You spared him," the king said. Kale nodded. "I did." "And what do you call that?" Kaler asked. Kale looked around at the stunned faces. "I call it the only war worth winning." Even after the treaty was signed, the land did not heal overnight. The soil of the divide still bore the scars, cratered earth, splintered spears, rusting helmets half buried like forgotten prayers. The rivers ran clearer, but the blood in memory still tinged every drop. Kale remained in the village, though no one asked him to. He could have left, gone with the traders heading east, or to the city where stories of peace brought gold. But he stayed. Not because he was brave. Because he needed to watch the silence settle. And it was in this quiet, when the horns had long stopped and the banners folded, that the whispers began. Whispers that the soldier he had saved, the dying man he gave water to, had once burned Kale's village. It wasn't just war. It was personal. And people didn't forget. They remembered the fire. The screams. The blackened bones of loved ones. And now, they saw Kale walking freely, even talking to a king who should have been dead. A king they believed should have stayed that way. One night, Kale found a mark painted on his door, red ash in the shape of an X. A silent curse. A symbol of betrayal. He washed it off with water. Just like he'd once saved the king. But stains, they don't always vanish. Cale's dreams grew heavier. He saw the battlefield over and over, the enemy king crawling, coughing, his face torn by shrapnel and eyes wet with pain. And in those dreams, he always had 2 flasks. One he gave. The other, he poured out on the ground. In his sleep, he wondered. What if I'd let him die? Would the war have ended differently? Would people cheer me instead of curse? Would the village have rebuilt faster? He never had the answer. But one day, someone gave him one. An old soldier, long scarred from battle and speech, stood by Cale's fire in the dead of night. He spoke not with anger, but with weight, the way truth sometimes bends a man's spine. "I knew your father," he rasped. Cale turned, eyes narrowed. "Did he fight?" "He taught me to," the man said. "But he told me once, my son will change this land, not with blade or shield, but with mercy." Cale swallowed hard. "I didn't save that king for glory. I know why you did it," the soldier interrupted. "And I know what they say. But you gave water to a man who killed your kin, because you knew his death wouldn't bring yours back. That makes you stronger than anyone with a sword." The soldier dropped something into the firelight, a torn banner from the battlefield, now clean, folded. Its colors were Aran blue and Velmari red, stitched together. Cale looked at it, confused. "I took it from the hill after you left," the man said. "Because it reminded me of what peace costs. And who pays it?" He vanished into the dark before Cale could reply. That night, Cale lit a lantern and climbed the old bell tower, a broken relic that had once warned of incoming armies. Its bell had been cracked since the 3rd siege. But it still stood, barely. From the top, the entire valley stretched beneath him, charred fields, reborn in wildflowers. Crumbled forts. Silent rivers. New tents rising on old blood. He hung the stitched banner from the broken arch of the tower. The blue and red shimmered in the wind. Below, people woke to see it fluttering in the dawn. Some called it madness. Some wept. Some turned away. But none could deny it was there. Like a scar-turned symbol. A wound that didn't close, but didn't fester either. Weeks passed. Cale worked rebuilding the granary, helping elders carry stones, teaching younger children how to clean wounds without fear. No one thanked him. But slowly, the whispers faded. One day, a caravan came from the west, traders bearing silks and books and spices. Among them, a scroll sealed in royal wax. It was addressed to Cale. From Caler. The scroll read, "My wounds heal, but my soul bears yours. I burned what was once yours, and yet you gave me breath. You changed a king when swords could not. I rebuild what I destroyed. I sow fields where I salted them. But in all the lands I walk, only one name they whisper now. Not mine. Yours." Cale folded the letter slowly, tucking it into the stitched banner now draped over his own shoulder like a sash. He didn't smile. He just exhaled. Like something heavy had finally left him. 2 winters passed. The land had changed, not in grand declarations or monuments, but in the quiet details that only a keen eye noticed. Wheat now grew where the trenches once ran. Children played where arrows had once rained. And traders no longer looked over their shoulders when they crossed the old war border. Peace had found a home here. It was fragile. But real. Cale had changed too. He still lived humbly, in the same cottage with the patched roof, tending the same quiet fields, but whispers followed him wherever he went. Not of shame anymore. Of myth. The soldier who saved a king. The water-bearer of war. The peacemaker without a crown. Yet despite the quiet fame that spread beyond the valleys, from city gates to court halls, Cale refused every invitation to politics, to military, even to the king's new advisory circle. He didn't want power. He just wanted silence to mean something. But fate doesn't always honor that wish. Not when history owes you a second debt. In the capital of Velmer, a rebellion ignited, small at first. A cluster of generals, bitter that Cale had bent the knee to an enemy peasant and declared peace. They saw mercy as weakness. Diplomacy as betrayal. They whispered lies, that Cale had been broken in battle, forced to surrender. That Cale had cast some ancient curse. That the king had never truly ruled since the day water was poured into his mouth by a nameless soldier. The flames of war flickered again. Only this time, they wanted to burn Cale. A bounty was placed on his head. False accusations spread, that Cale was the true leader of the rebellion. That he planned to dethrone Cale and take the crown. Cale heard the rumors as a messenger dropped a sealed letter on his doorstep, breathing heavily. It was from Cale, short, frantic, and written with shaking hand. They turn against peace. Against you. They hunt what they do not understand. Run, Cale. Run far. Cale didn't run. He packed only what he needed. His father's knife, the stitched banner, and a pouch of dried herbs. Then, as dusk fell, he began walking, not away, but toward the capital. It took him 7 days to reach the gates of Velmer. By then, the city was split in two, half still loyal to the crown, half armed for revolt. The streets were choked with soldiers, barricades, smoke from burning flyers. Statues had been toppled, and the people watched from windows like ghosts behind glass. Cale walked with no army. No armor. Just a banner across his shoulders and a letter in his hand. They let him in, not out of kindness, but because they wanted to see him. The soldier. The myth. The threat. Cale was brought before a fractured council of generals, seated where the high court once ruled. Cale was nowhere in sight. "You're not a king," one of them spat. "Yet you rule hearts like one." "I rule nothing," Cale said. "And I never wanted to." A younger general leaned forward, cruel grin on his face. "Then why are the people ready to follow you into peace, while they forget our victories in war?" Cale's answer was quiet. Because peace fed them when war left them starving. The chamber fell silent. But silence is not surrender. A voice from the shadows said, "Take him. Hang him in the square. Let the people see what happens to traitors of tradition." Soldiers stepped forward. But before they could touch him, a horn blew across the capital walls. A sound not heard in years. Cale had returned. The king walked in, wounded, limping from an assassination attempt, but alive. His armor dented, eyes hollow, cloak torn. He said nothing at first. Just looked at Cale. Then at the generals. "I was saved by this man," he said, voice cracking. "And now you want him dead, because you cannot save yourselves from your own pride." One general stepped forward, blade drawn. "Then you'll fall with him." But he never struck. Because from the crowds behind the walls, the people surged. Pouring into the court, breaking through barricades, shouting not for war, but for Cale. Old soldiers. Farmers. Mothers. Even children. They had not forgotten the one who gave water instead of wrath. Who stitched peace together when kings were bleeding. The revolution collapsed under the weight of conscience. Cale stepped forward and took the crown from his own head, placing it in Cale's hands. "You never wanted this," he said. "But the world needs what you are." Cale looked at the crown. It was gold, studded with blood-colored rubies. Heavy with history. But he placed it down, not on his head, but on the stitched banner folded on the stone floor. I don't need a crown to serve peace, he whispered. And he walked away. They say now that the man who gave water to a dying king saved 2 kingdoms. He became legend not because he ruled, but because he refused to. And legends, after all, are born not in thrones, but in choices. The river still flowed. Even years later, when cities changed rulers, banners changed colors, and the world kept marching to the rhythm of empires, the water still sang the same soft song along its banks. That small riverbank, once soaked with blood, now bore wildflowers. A new stone rested there, not carved by royalty or sculpted by artisans, but rough, humble, and etched with 2 names side by side. Kale, son of no one. Kaler, king who remembered. They had both long vanished. No one knew when Kale truly died. No funeral had been held, no monument erected by his own will. It was said he simply walked into the forests one autumn evening, the same quiet way he had walked into battlefields and out of kingdoms. Kaler ruled wisely for years, rebuilding what war had undone. But the deeper stories, the real ones, weren't told on parchment scrolls or shouted in city halls. They were whispered in kitchens. Sung by children skipping stones. Carried in the hands of water-bearers who now wore no fear. Once, a young historian from a distant land journeyed to this river. He had heard the tale of the soldier who saved a king, a story that sounded too poetic to be true. He brought books. Maps. Questions. He asked villagers, elders, soldiers who had survived those days. But each gave him only pieces. Some called Kale a traitor-turned-savior. Others swore he was a prophet. One old woman, half-blind, simply smiled and said, "He didn't end the war with a sword. He ended it with a cup of water." The historian finally reached the stone by the river. He stood there, wind in his coat, pen in hand. And for the first time, he had no questions. Only awe. Because he realized the power of what had happened here. It wasn't that a man had saved a king. It was that a moment of mercy had shifted the course of history. A soldier could have walked away. But didn't. A king could have forgotten. But remembered. A world thirsty for vengeance had been given water instead. And that ripple had become a tide. Back in the capital, statues now stood not of war heroes, but of a soldier kneeling with a cup in his hand. The crown at his feet. A banner stitched behind him. The plaque read only. He gave water. The world gave him memory. And in distant lands, the tale was retold, reimagined, painted in temples, reenacted in theaters, transformed into song. Not because of battles. But because of the choice made in silence. The legacy of Kale was not written in victories. It was written in what he refused to destroy. The enemy king. The fragile peace. The soul of a nation. So now, whenever someone dips a hand into a stream to give water to a stranger. Whenever a soldier lowers their blade even when vengeance burns inside. They say Kale walks beside them. Not in body. But in choice. Because sometimes, the greatest power in this world is to spare.